Let's quickly get a move on here and stay with the aspect of the dragon. China is at it again. This time Beijing has blocked India and US's joint move to designate Sajid Mir a global terrorist. Sajid Mir is a Pak-based Lashkar-e-Taiba operative who's wanted in the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks. The block by China follows its use of a quote-unquote technical hold to stymie a similar move by India earlier too. India has slammed China at the UN and said that there's something genuinely wrong in this fight against terrorism and it's nothing but petty geopolitical interests. India also has offered several solutions to the UN Security Council to prevent member states from backing terrorists. So, by shielding Sajid Mir, is Beijing drawing the battle lines? We'll talk about that, but first, let's tell you a little more about Sajid Mir. Who is Sajid Mir, whom India and US want to be tagged as a global terrorist? He's a Pak-based Lashkar-e-Taiba operative, chief planner of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. US placed a $5 million bounty on his head, listed on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list, one of India's most wanted terrorists, plotted the terrorist attack in Australia in 2003, and there was an audio recording of his that was played in the UN, wherein he is actually instructing terrorists hold inside the Taj Hotel that if you see anybody walking around on the terraces, shoot them down. Now, this is not the first time that China has blocked India's proposal. Masood Azhar, Jaish-e-Mohammed chief. First, China shielded Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar. China first put a technical hold in 2009, 2016, 2017 and March 2019. And China said it needs more time to assess information and finally accepted it in the fifth proposal in May 2019. China also blocked a bid by India to designate Abdul Rauf Asghar, one of the masterminds of the 1998 IC-814 hijacking, as a global terrorist, and said that it needs more time to carefully evaluate the proposal. Asghar is a brother of Pak-based Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist Masood Azhar. Now, he's accused of masterminding a number of terror attacks himself. It's not the first time China has blocked a bid to tag Sajid Mir as a global terrorist. Last year in September too, China blocked India's bid. In October 2022, China blocked the bid to designate Talah Saeed, son of Lashkar-e-Taiba chief Hafiz Saeed, as a UN-listed terrorist. Now, at a high-level United Nations conference on counter-terrorism, India lashed out at China after it blocked India's bid. Prakash Gupta, the Joint Secretary at the United Nations, said justice still continues to elude the victims of Mumbai terror attacks and played an audio recording of Sajid Mir guiding fellow terrorists to hunt down foreigners inside the Taj Hotel and kill them indiscriminately.
He was listed as a proscribed terrorist under the national laws of India. He was proscribed under the laws of the United States, this host country, and of several other countries globally, many of whose nationals lost their lives. But when the proposal for listing him did not go through the Security Council sanctions regime, we had strong reasons to believe that something was genuinely wrong in the global sanctions regime, as manifested in the Security Council. If we cannot get established terrorists who have been proscribed across global landscapes listed under the Security Council architecture for pure geopolitical interests, then we really do not have the genuine political will needed to sincerely fight this challenge of terrorism.
तो जो जहाँ पे आपको मूवमेंट नजर आती है, बंदा की छत पे चल रहा है, कोई आ रहा है जा रहा है, उसको फायर ठोको. उसे नहीं पता यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है. इंशाल्लाह. तो जो जहाँ पे आपको मूवमेंट नजर आती है, बंदा की छत पे चल रहा है, कोई आ रहा है जा रहा है, उसको फायर ठोको. उसे नहीं पता यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है. इंशाल्लाह.
And on the same story, a mega CNN News18 exclusive, our investigations editor Manoj Gupta getting us these inputs from top intel sources who are telling News18 that Sajid Mir blocking is desperate attempt by China to support Pakistan in terror activities. Top intelligence sources telling CNN News18 that while Pakistan denies the location of Sajid Mir, India has given his locations multiple times, including video proof. Intel source reveals that Sajid Mir is accused in 26/11 Mumbai attacks and should be punished to save the world from terror activities. We are also given to understand why our intel source that his name was even confessed by David Coleman Headley, and everything is on record. Kamal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, with us. Professor Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Suzhou University, with us. VP CCG and former Chinese diplomat, and also Daniel S. Markey, Senior Advisor, South Asia, United States Institute of Peace. Namaste. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Kaval Sibalji, how would you respond to this? How does India take this forward? A lot of experts have been critical of India for not taking China's name openly while making this mention. Where would you stand?
Well, I think this decision by China, once again, to block the designation of Sajid Mir as a terrorist. We just heard, a phone conversation by this fellow asking the terrorists to kill anybody who moved.
Yes.
I mean, China is sending several messages. One is that they are not at all concerned about India's sensitivities. They don't want to send any positive message to India. Even if the G20 summit is in the offing, they don't want to even make a gesture which will actually cost them nothing. Okay, the border issue is a much more complex matter, and we are having bilateral discussions. But on this, the case is so clear. The case is so clear, but they don't feel obliged at all to make any positive gesture which might create the right atmosphere for a G20 meeting if Xi Jinping comes to India. Number two, China is violating all its commitments it has made in various forums, whether it is the BRICS summit, BRICS forum, or SCO, or the G20, or any other discussion in international forum, even when it relates to Afghanistan and everything else, where everybody agrees on countering international terrorism. China is party to all this, but yet when it comes to India, it violates all its commitments and actually doesn't bother about how it looks, how the world will look at it, how its image may get affected. They're quite unbothered. And thirdly, of course, there's complicity between China and Pakistan, long-standing complicity, because China knows what the message is, that they will support Pakistan on terrorism directed at India. And it is at Pakistan's behest that China does all this. They want to cultivate favor with Pakistan at the expense of India and at the expense of an international consensus on countering terrorism. They have been, as you know, Anand, in various forums, actually praising Pakistan for fight against terrorism, saying how much Pakistan has sacrificed itself in its fight against terrorism. And yet, when it comes to Chinese nationals being attacked in Pakistan, then China, of course, goes into a huff and is very unhappy that Pakistan doesn't provide protection.
Let me ask, let's ask...
It's an extremely selfish, self-centered view that China takes, and it will have repercussions on its relations with India inevitably.
But let's ask Professor Victor Gao, why pick Pakistan over India? We are a more reliable nation, stronger, safer, and of course more financially much sound. Why would you want to put your eggs in a bottomless bucket, Professor Victor Gao?
Thank you very much for having me. As far as China is concerned, the Indian subcontinent, which now contains both India and Pakistan, has always been very important to China. And throughout thousands of years, the relations between China and the Indian subcontinent has always been peaceful. Now the fact that there is India on the one hand and Pakistan on the other hand, China need to make decisions on the merits of each of the situation. There is no denying that China-Pakistani solidarity and cooperation are deeply rooted, and nothing can shake this brotherliness between China and Pakistan. On the other hand, I would say China values friendship and good neighborliness with India. After all, both China and India each has a population of more than 1.4 billion, and they have tremendous amount of responsibilities for each of it, as well as for mankind as a whole. Therefore, I don't think China wants to develop China-Pakistani relations and friendship at the expense of China-India relations. And I do hope eventually China's relations with India as well as with Pakistan will be tremendously beneficial for each of us. And as China has pulled off the peace treaty between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I hope eventually China can play a very positive role in creating a better rapprochement between India and Pakistan.
When you say, Professor Victor Gao,
neighboring countries.
Professor Victor Gao, when you say equations with Pakistan, I hope you mean the Pakistan military establishment and the Pakistan civilian government. Is that
well,
what?
From the Chinese perspective, there is only one Pakistan, and we do not bother in the domestic internal affairs of Pakistan.
I mean,
whether it's involved in the Pakistani government or the military.
So is Sajid Mir a proscribed terrorist Sajid Mir, a proscribed terrorist, also part of this brotherhood of Pakistan?
Allow me to emphasize,
Ji.
China is a victim of international cross-border terrorism in itself. Therefore, China condemns cross-border international terrorism in all shapes and colors. Then, as to how to deal with each organization, China will need to make its own decision on the merits of each decision, and China will need to do its own homework rather depending on the representations of any of the other organizations. Therefore, I hope you will also respect China's sovereign right to make its own decision as to how it wants to designate an organization one way or another. That decision is not made by any other country, but by China itself.
But Sajid Mir is a proscribed terrorist. We've got visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi leaving New York and heading towards the Andrews base in Washington, D.C. Plenty of people who have come there, the diaspora wanting to meet him, and then him making his way out. So the popularity of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the time invested by President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, very evident. The diaspora, very popular. Daniel, China says it does not respect terrorists, but they continue to exercise this technical hold. How would you read this? Are we looking at an escalation? Is China clearly saying either US or us to India?
I don't perceive this
Definitely
as necessarily an
not.
escalation. I think Ambassador Sybil had it exactly right. This is a pattern that's been going on for some time. China's been shielding a variety of Pakistan-based terrorists from international action. These are individuals who are quite clearly problematic, should not be shielded from sanction. But China sees its relationship with Pakistan as very important. I think China pockets some advantages with Pakistan from doing this. Some leverage, some influence is seen as helpful by Pakistan. I think China has, unfortunately, for regional stability, more or less reached a conclusion that it's got a serious problem on its hands with India, and that India and the United States are increasingly tied together, and that makes the India problem that much harder. So I think China is not only signaling to Pakistan, to India, it's also signaling to the United States that it doesn't need to play by these particular rules, and that it will continue to sort of do what suits China best, and not necessarily to see terrorism in the way that we do. And I'll make one last point. The Chinese have, obviously there have been some very high-level meetings between our Secretary of State Blinken and Chinese leaders in Beijing, where both sides have suggested that there may be more that they can do together in a cooperative way, with some serious caveats. I think a message like this is another indication of the limits of that cooperation and the way that China will sort of frame that cooperation in ways that suit Beijing, not necessarily ways that suit the United States.
Ambassador Sybil?
Well, China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It plays a very active role in the United Nations. It talks about the UN Charter, etc., etc. Part of adhering to the UN Charter and UN principles is the fight against terrorism. And here China has double standards. When it comes to terrorism directed at China, that's a big issue. When it comes to terrorism directed at India, it's not an issue. They will support Pakistan. Now, the point is that there are elements in Pakistan actually who are promoting terrorism against China. India has absolutely no role in promoting any kind of terrorism against China. And yet China doesn't see the difference. Because China has this very arrogant posture towards India that they don't need to bother about India's sensitivities. They have the power, so they can do what they want in accordance with their own interests. Just now the Chinese gentleman said that they will decide on their own what the realities are. What will they do? Will they go and investigate on the ground, send people on the ground, talk to Sajid Mir, talk to the Pakistani establishment, find out what the reality is, talk to other people who have information about his role? After all, United States put a $5 million bounty on it. When they say they will talk to, they make their own judgment based on what? Based on their hostility towards India? or based on certain principles on which there is a genuine international consensus. Now, as far as China's role in Saudi Arabia, Iran is concerned, let's not hype it up. Let's not hype it up. It is actually Iraq and Oman that played a vital role. And of course, Iraq and Iran both wanted some kind of a big power that could give some kind of a cover to this agreement, and they went to China. So let's not hype this peace business. If they really mean peace, then they should make peace with India.
But Kamal Sibalji and Daniel, final.
Agree to revert back to the positions they held.
I have the final 2 minutes. So quickly, I want to understand, how do we change this status quo, especially at the UN? This veto power thing, how can this be undone? The reforms, if they have to kick in, if there have got to be additions to the UN Security Council, changes in the UN, how is this going to happen? Kamal Sibalji, and then Daniel.
It won't happen in the foreseeable future, frankly, because there is a consensus that UN should be reformed, but how it should be reformed, what should be the numbers involved in terms of permanent members, non-permanent members, there is no agreement. And then China will not let India come in. China will not let Japan come in. Russia will not let Japan come in, and Germany come in. We have a consensus, at least 3 or 4 permanent members. But there are other people in the global south that we are taking leadership of, which do not support India's permanent membership, for that matter, any expansion of permanent membership. So I think it's going to be a very difficult task.
So then do we dismantle UN altogether? Should nations move away and form a separate organization, Daniel? Because this is like a never-ending merry-go-round.
Right. No, I mean, there's going to be frustration with the UN process. That's been a feature of the UN basically since the start. The ambassador, again, is correct. Don't anticipate any near-term reforms that would resolve this particular problem, or even some of the more general problems about lack of representation for vast parts of the world at the UN and so on and so forth. It's not going to change. That doesn't mean you get rid of it, though. The UN serves other purposes. If the UN didn't exist, you'd need to reinvent it. People need a place, physical place, and different mechanisms to meet, and it's good to have these conversations, even if we don't get what we want through the UN process. Right. The United States and India and other countries who are concerned about these terrorist groups can still speak up, and they can do so in the UN, and that's part of its value.
Well, let's see what happens in that one-on-one personal engagement, private engagement between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Kamal Sibalji and also Daniel, thank you. Daniel Market, thank you very much for your time. Victor Gao, Professor Victor Gao, thank you for your